The FW-190 pilot never saw the tracers that killed him. 1 second, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was lining up his shot on a crippled B-17 limping home over Germany. The next, his wingman's fighter was tumbling toward the ground in pieces, smoke pouring from what used to be the cockpit. Franz slammed his stick left and dove away, his heart hammering. He'd been in combat for 2 years, shot down dozens of enemy aircraft, but he'd never seen anything like what just happened. His wingman had approached the bomber from 6 o'clock, the dead zone, where most defensive guns couldn't reach. Except they could. And they did. The B-17 had turned its entire rear section into a kill zone, and his wingman flew right into it. This is the story of how American bombers became flying fortresses that German pilots learned to fear. How 13 machine guns turned a bomber into something that could defend itself better than most fighters, and how the Flying Fortress earned its name with German blood. 1942. The American 8th Air Force started arriving in England. They brought their bombers with them, B-17's, big, 4-engine heavy bombers designed to fly deep into Germany and destroy industrial targets. The British had already been bombing Germany for years, but they did it at night. Couldn't see what they were hitting most of the time, just dropped bombs on cities and hoped for the best. The Americans wanted to do precision daylight bombing. Go in during the day, find the factories and oil refineries and rail yards, put bombs right on target. The British thought the Americans were crazy, said daylight bombing was suicide. German fighters would tear the bomber formations apart. German anti-aircraft guns would fill the sky with flak. The losses would be unsustainable, but the Americans were confident. They had the B-17, the Flying Fortress. They called it that for a reason. The Boeing was designed from the start as a defensive fortress in the sky. Most bombers of that era had maybe 3 or 4 machine guns for defense. The B-17 had 10 guns in early models. Later models had 13. 13 Browning 50 caliber machine guns positioned to cover every angle of approach, 2 in the nose, 2 in the top turret, 2 in the ball turret hanging under the belly, 2 in the waist positions on either side of the fuselage, 1 in the radio room, 2 in the tail. Some late models even added chin turrets under the nose with 2 more guns. Every gun was a Browning M250 caliber, the same weapon that terrified Japanese pilots in the Pacific. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute. When multiple guns fired together, the weight of fire was staggering. A B-17 could throw out thousands of rounds per minute in any direction, and the guns were arranged so that overlapping fields of fire covered the entire airplane. There were no blind spots, no safe approach angles. Anywhere you came at a B-17, you were flying into machine gun fire. The bombers flew in formation too, tight formations where each plane's guns could protect the others. A German fighter attacking one bomber might have to deal with defensive fire from 3 or 4 B-17s simultaneously. 40 or 50 machine guns all shooting at the same target. The Americans called it mutual support. The Germans called it hell. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke flew Bf-109s with JG-11. He wrote a diary during the war, published it later. One of his entries from October 1942 described his first encounter with B-17s. He'd intercepted American bombers near the coast. The formation looked vulnerable. Big, slow targets. He thought it would be easy. His squadron attacked from the standard angle, coming in from behind and slightly below. 6 fighters in line, ready to rake the bombers with cannon fire. The B-17s opened up when the fighters were still 600 meters away. Knoke said the tracers looked like glowing garden hoses arcing through the sky, hundreds of them, all converging on his squadron's approach path. The fighter in front of him took a burst that shattered his canopy. The pilot pulled up hard, broke formation, disappeared into clouds trailing smoke. Knoke pressed his attack, got to maybe 400 meters before his 109 started taking hits. Nothing critical, just thuds and pings as 50 caliber rounds punched through his wings and fuselage. But it scared him. He fired his cannons early, way outside effective range, then broke off. Didn't claim any kills that day. Neither did anyone else in his squadron. They'd attacked 6 bombers with 6 fighters and come away with nothing except damage and 1 pilot wounded. That was the moment Knoke realized the Americans weren't going to be easy targets. The defensive armament on the B-17 kept improving throughout the war. Early B-17E models had 10 guns. The B-17F added an 11th gun in the radio room, but there was still a problem. Attacking from head-on directly at the bomber's nose gave German fighters a brief window where only the 2 nose guns could engage. 2 guns versus the fighter's 2 or 3 cannons. More equal odds. German pilots figured this out quickly. Started making frontal attacks, coming in fast from 12 o'clock high, firing, then blowing past the bomber formation before the other defensive guns could track them. It worked for a while. American bombers started taking heavy losses from head-on attacks. The crew in the nose, the bombardier and navigator, they had small handheld 50 caliber guns they could fire out the glass nose windows. But small handheld guns against a fighter doing 300 miles per hour wasn't much of a defense. The fighter would flash past in seconds. You get maybe 1 short burst, and most of that would miss. Meanwhile, the fighter's cannons were tearing up your nose section, killing your crew, destroying your instruments. So Boeing added the chin turret. The B-17G model mounted a remotely operated turret right under the nose with 2 more 50 caliber guns. Now a fighter making a frontal attack faced 4 guns minimum, possibly 6 if you counted the cheek guns some models carried. 4 synchronized Browning 50s that could track the attacking fighter and maintain aimed fire through the entire approach. German pilots who'd gotten used to frontal attacks suddenly found themselves flying into a wall of 50 caliber fire. The easy approach angle disappeared. Lieutenant Gustav Rödel flew with JG-27. He described a frontal attack on B-17GS in early 1944, said it was like attacking a flak battery. The combined fire from multiple bombers created a curtain of tracers he had to fly through. His Bf-109 was hit 3 times before he even got into firing range. 1 round smashed through his engine cowling. Another hit his right wing and took out part of his aileron. A third went through his canopy, missed his head by maybe 20 centimeters, and exited through the armor plate behind his seat. He fired his cannons anyway. More out of stubbornness than any real hope of scoring a hit. Saw his shells impact the lead bomber's nose. Then he was past, hauling his damaged 109 into a dive to get away from the formation. He made it home, barely. His engine was overheating, his control response was sluggish, and his canopy had a hole that let freezing air blast into the cockpit at 25,000 feet altitude. When he landed, the mechanics counted 15 hits total, 15 50 caliber hits from 1 attack pass. The crew chief said he was lucky to be alive. Rödel never tried a frontal attack again, said it wasn't worth it. The thing about the B-17's defensive armament was how well integrated it all was. The guns weren't just randomly placed. Boeing's engineers thought about fields of fire, overlapping coverage, and crew coordination. The top turret gunner could cover the entire upper hemisphere. The ball turret gunner covered below. The tail gunner had the best field of fire behind the aircraft. The waist gunners covered the beam positions on either side. And with the chin turret, the front was protected too. Anywhere you approached from, you were under fire. The gunners trained together as a crew. They practiced calling out targets, coordinating their fire, tracking fast-moving fighters. They learned to lead their targets, account for the B-17's speed and the fighter's speed, calculate deflection angles instinctively. The good crews could put accurate fire on a target within seconds of spotting it. The really good crews could hit fighters at 400 meters or more. That was exceptional shooting, but it happened often enough to make German pilots cautious. Each gunner had a specific sector to watch. The top turret covered 12 o'clock high to 6 o'clock high. The ball turret covered 12 o'clock low to 6 o'clock low. The tail covered directly behind and slightly to either side. The waist gunners covered the beam and helped the tail gunner if fighters attacked from behind. The nose gunner and bombardier handled frontal attacks. Everybody had a job. Everybody knew their sector. And when fighters showed up, all those sectors combined into a sphere of fire surrounding the bomber. Up Focke-Wulf Franz flew UFW-190s with JG-2. He was an experienced pilot by 1943, over 100 combat missions. He knew how to attack bombers, come in from an angle the guns couldn't cover as well, attack damaged stragglers separated from the formation. Don't stay in the fire zone any longer than necessary. Get in, shoot, get out. He'd shot down several B-17s using those tactics. But even with experience and good tactics, the risk was enormous. Franz described attacking a B-17 that had dropped out of formation with engine damage. The bomber was alone, struggling to maintain altitude perfect target. He approached from 5 o'clock low, where the ball turret had the worst angle, came in fast. The B-17's tail gunner opened fire at maybe 500 meters. Franz saw the tracers and adjusted his approach slightly. The tail gunner kept firing. At 400 meters, the waist gunners joined in. Now there were 3 guns shooting at him. Franz started taking hits. His windscreen cracked. Something smashed into his left wing. But he was committed. He fired his cannons at 300 meters, a long burst, saw his shells walking across the B-17's fuselage. Then he broke hard left and dove away. He claimed the bomber as a probable kill. It was losing altitude and smoking. But when he landed, his UFW-190 had 22 hits. 22. His left aileron was so damaged he could barely control the plane. His windscreen was shattered. Several rounds had hit his engine but somehow missed anything critical. The ground crew spent 2 days repairing the damage. Franz put in his report that attacking B-17s was more dangerous than attacking fighters. At least with fighters, if you shot them, they went down. The B-17s could absorb enormous damage and keep flying. And while you were trying to shoot them down, they were shooting back with 13 machine guns. The 50 caliber rounds the B-17s fired were devastating to German fighters. The Bf-109 and UFW-190 were relatively small, lightweight fighters. They had some armor protection for the pilot and critical components, but they couldn't carry too much weight and still maintain performance. A direct hit from a 50 caliber round could knock out an engine, sever control cables, punch through the cockpit, or cause structural failure. German pilots learned to respect that firepower. You didn't just fly at a B-17 and hope for the best. You had to be smart, fast, and lucky. The lucky part was important. Even with perfect tactics, sometimes you'd catch a stray round. The B-17 gunners were firing hundreds of rounds. Most of those rounds missed, but some didn't. And if one of the ones that didn't miss happened to hit something important on your fighter, you were done. Your engine would seize. Your wing would fail. You'd lose control. Then you were either dead or bailing out, assuming you had time to bail out. Plenty of German pilots didn't. Lieutenant Heinz Knoke, same pilot from earlier, wrote about watching a friend die attacking B-17s. The friend, Lieutenant Ma, had made a good approach. Came in from the sun, high-speed, firing position looked perfect. He opened up with his cannons, got a solid burst into one of the bombers. Then the B-17's top turret tracked onto him. 250 caliber guns, maybe a 2-second burst. Ma's Bf-109 just exploded. Not caught fire, not broke apart, exploded. Like someone had detonated a bomb in the cockpit. One moment the 109 was there, the next it was debris. Knoke said he couldn't understand what happened. He'd seen planes get shot down before. They'd usually break up or burn. This was different. Later he figured the 50 caliber rounds must have hit Ma's ammunition storage. German fighters carried explosive 20 cannon rounds. If those cooked off from enemy fire, they'd destroy the plane from the inside. That's what probably killed Ma, but it didn't change the outcome. He was still dead, and all because a B-17 gunner got lucky for 2 seconds. The psychological impact of attacking B-17s was significant. German pilots knew every attack might be their last. Even successful attacks where you shot down the bomber could get you killed. You had to fly through that defensive fire, had to get close enough to make your shots count. And while you were doing that, potentially dozens of 50 caliber machine guns were trying to kill you. The stress accumulated. Pilots who'd been aggressive early in the war became cautious. Some started refusing missions against American daylight bombers. Command called it cowardice. The pilots called it survival. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe had to change tactics. Individual fighters or small groups couldn't effectively attack B-17 formations. The defensive fire was too intense, so they started using larger formations. Sometimes 30 or 40 fighters attacking together. They'd try to overwhelm the bombers with simultaneous attacks from multiple angles. Some fighters would make frontal attacks to disrupt the formation, while others came in from the sides and rear. They'd concentrate fire on one bomber at a time, trying to knock it out of formation. Once a B-17 left the formation, it lost the mutual support of the other bombers' guns. Then it became vulnerable. Even those tactics had limited success. The B-17s flew tight formations specifically to prevent that kind of separation. If one plane was damaged, the others would slow down to stay with it if possible. The bomber boxes, as the Americans called their formations, were designed to provide maximum defensive coverage. Any fighter attacking any bomber in the formation would take fire from multiple B-17s. The only way to reliably defeat that defense was to accept heavy losses. Trade fighters for bombers. The Germans tried that. For a while they succeeded. Shot down lots of B-17s, but they lost lots of fighters doing it. And unlike the Americans, Germany couldn't easily replace those losses. Hauptmann Hans Joachim Jabs flew night fighters with NJG-1, but he occasionally flew day missions against American bombers. He described the defensive fire as the most intense thing he'd ever experienced, said it was worse than flak. At least with flak, the explosions were somewhat predictable. You could see the black puffs and try to avoid them. The B-17's guns were different, tracers coming from every direction. You never knew which one might hit you. He said the gunners were good too. Better than he expected. They'd track his fighters smoothly, leading the target properly, firing controlled bursts, not panic spray and pray shooting, actual aimed fire. That made them dangerous. Jabs developed a tactic where he'd approach the formation, get close enough to draw fire, then break off before actually attacking. He'd watch which gunners tracked him most accurately, which ones seemed most alert. Then he'd approach again, targeting a different bomber, one with less effective defensive fire. It worked sometimes, but it was time-consuming and exposed him to risk even when he wasn't actually attacking. Eventually, he decided day missions against B-17s weren't worth it. Stuck to night fighting, where at least the enemy couldn't see him coming. The ammunition capacity on the B-17 was substantial. Each gun typically had 400 to 600 rounds available, depending on position. The tail guns had more, around 500 rounds each. The waist guns had similar loads. That meant each position could fire for several minutes continuously, though gunners were trained to fire in bursts to conserve ammunition and prevent overheating. In practice, a B-17 carried around 6,000 to 8,000 rounds total for all guns. That's a lot of ammunition, enough for sustained defensive fire throughout a mission lasting several hours. German fighters couldn't match that. A Bf-109G carried maybe 200 rounds for its 20mm cannon and 1,000 rounds for its machine guns. The cannon ammunition would last about 12 seconds of continuous fire. The machine guns maybe 40 seconds. Once that was gone, the fighter was defenseless, had to return to base and rearm. Meanwhile, the B-17 still had thousands of rounds left. Could defend itself all the way to the target, through the target, and all the way home. The endurance difference was massive. The gunners themselves became experts in their craft. Many had hundreds of hours of training before ever seeing combat. They practiced on ground ranges, firing at towed targets, learning how to estimate range and lead moving targets. They studied aircraft recognition so they could identify friend from foe instantly. They learned their guns inside and out, how to clear jams, how to change barrels, how to maintain the weapons in freezing conditions at high altitude. By the time they flew their first mission, they were competent gunners. After 10 missions, they were experienced. After 25 missions, they were veterans who'd probably saved their crew's lives multiple times. Sergeant Michael Aruth was a ball turret gunner on a B-17 with the 94th Bomb Group. The ball turret was a small, cramped sphere of plexiglass and metal hanging under the bomber's belly. It held two .50 caliber guns and one gunner, curled up in a fetal position operating the turret controls. The position was claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and extremely dangerous. If the B-17's landing gear was damaged, the ball turret gunner couldn't get out before landing. He'd be crushed, but it was also one of the most effective defensive positions because it had an unobstructed view below the aircraft. Aruth flew 30 missions. He was credited with 3 confirmed kills and 2 probables, all fighters that attacked from below, thinking they could avoid defensive fire. They couldn't. Aruth would spot them coming, traverse his turret to track them, and open fire when they got close enough. His longest confirmed kill was at 450 meters. He hit a Bf-109 that was lining up on another bomber in the formation. The fighter's wing came off and it spun into the ground. The pilot never even saw where the fire came from. That was the real advantage of the B-17's defensive armament. The overlapping fields of fire meant gunners could protect other bombers in the formation, not just their own. German fighters couldn't focus on a single target without exposing themselves to fire from multiple directions. It forced them to attack quickly, fire hastily, and break off before they could confirm kills. Some German pilots got around this by using rockets or heavy cannons that could engage from beyond .50 caliber range. But those weapons were less accurate and carried limited ammunition. Most fighters still had to get close and use their standard armament, which meant flying into machine gun fire. The addition of the chin turret on the B-17G model fundamentally changed the tactical situation. German pilots had relied on frontal attacks as their primary method. Come in from ahead, fire, flash past before the defensive guns could respond. The chin turret eliminated that advantage. Now frontal attacks were just as dangerous as attacks from any other angle, maybe more dangerous because the fighter was heading directly toward the guns. No evasive maneuvering. Just a straight line into the fire zone. Oberleutnant Walther Dahl was one of the Luftwaffe's top bomber killers. He specialized in attacking American heavy bombers. By 1944, he'd shot down multiple B-17's and B-24's. He developed tactics specifically for defeating the defensive armament. Attack from above and behind, diving through the formation at high speed. Fire at close range, 2 or 3 second burst maximum. Then keep diving, using speed to escape. Don't try to climb back up into the formation. Don't make multiple passes. One attack, make it count. Get out. Even with those tactics, Dahl took damage on almost every mission. His fighters would come back with bullet holes, damaged control surfaces, shot out instruments. Once a .50 caliber round went through his cockpit, hit his oxygen regulator, and depressurized his system at 26,000 feet. He nearly blacked out from hypoxia before descending to thicker air. Another time a round hit his fuel tank. Didn't ignite, luckily, but punctured it. He lost fuel pressure and had to make an emergency landing at a forward airfield. The mechanics counted 11 hits on his FW-190, 11 hits from one attack pass. Dahl survived the war. He shot down over 30 heavy bombers, but he lost dozens of wingmen and squadron mates doing it. The casualty rate for German fighter pilots attacking B-17 formations was staggering. Some units lost 50% of their pilots in a month. These defensive guns didn't just shoot down fighters. They damaged them, forced them to break off, reduced their effectiveness, and demoralized the pilots. Every mission was Russian roulette. Eventually, your luck ran out. The maintenance requirements for all those guns were significant. Each .50 caliber Browning had to be cleaned, inspected, and serviced regularly. Barrels wore out after firing thousands of rounds and had to be replaced. Feed mechanisms would jam if not properly maintained. At high altitude in sub-zero temperatures, the guns could freeze. Lubricants had to be specially formulated to work at -40 degrees. The armorers who maintained the guns worked long hours keeping the weapons functional. But they took pride in their work. They knew the gunners' lives depended on those weapons functioning properly. There are stories of B-17s returning from missions with multiple guns jammed or damaged. The gunners would report what happened, the armorers would fix the problems, and the bomber would fly again the next day with all guns operational. The reliability of the Browning 50 was legendary. It would keep firing under conditions that would disable other weapons. Frozen, overheated, dirty, damaged. It didn't matter. The gun worked. That reliability gave the B-17 crews confidence. They knew their defensive weapons would function when needed. By late 1944, German fighter pilots were increasingly reluctant to attack B-17 formations. The losses were too high. The risk was too great. Some units refused to engage unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority. Others would shadow the bomber formations without attacking, just reporting their position to ground controllers. The aggressive attacks that characterized 1943 became rare by 1945. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel, experienced pilots, and serviceable aircraft. Attacking well-defended B-17 formations was no longer tactically sound. It was just suicide. The B-17's 13 machine guns achieved what they were designed to do. They turned the bomber into a flying fortress that could defend itself against fighter attack. They didn't make the bomber invincible. B-17s were shot down, lots of them, but the defensive armament ensured that shooting them down was expensive for the Germans. Every B-17 kill cost the Luftwaffe aircraft and pilots they couldn't afford to lose. The attrition rate favored the Americans. They could replace losses. Germany couldn't, and that made all the difference. German pilots who survived the war had immense respect for the B-17. Not affection, respect. They recognized it as a formidable opponent. The defensive firepower, the structural strength, the ability to absorb damage and keep flying. Franz Stigler, the pilot from the beginning of this story, later said the B-17 was the toughest aircraft he ever fought. He'd attacked them dozens of times, shot down several, but he never underestimated them. Every attack was dangerous. Every mission could be his last. The 13 machine guns made sure of that. The Flying Fortress earned its name in the skies over Germany, not through invulnerability, but through the sheer volume of defensive fire it could produce. 13 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, positioned to cover every approach angle, fired by trained gunners who knew their job. German pilots learned to fear that distinctive sound, that deep hammering roar of multiple 50s firing simultaneously. They learned that attacking a B-17 formation meant flying through a storm of bullets. Some made it through, many didn't, and the ones who did rarely came away undamaged. The psychological impact lasted beyond the war. German veterans would describe the defensive fire as the most terrifying thing they experienced in combat, more than flak, more than enemy fighters. The knowledge that dozens of heavy machine guns were tracking your every move, that hundreds of rounds were being fired at you, that one lucky hit could end everything. That fear was the final weapon in the B-17's defensive arsenal, and it was brutally effective. Subscribe for more untold stories from World War II.